Perfect. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I'm very excited. I'm going to actually make him the host again. Ryan Myers is here with us, and he's going to talk a little bit about his really interesting new product and device that is not on the market yet, but I know we are on our way. So I'm just going to quickly let you introduce yourself, kind of talk a little bit about how you came to be interested in this kind of work, and how you got started. And then after you've introduced, you can go right into your presentation, and I'll come back at the end of the presentation and we'll do some Q&A. So, but thank you for joining us tonight.
Sounds great. Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me. The Genesis story. My background and my interest has always been in medical and neuro in general. So I have my PhD in bioengineering out of a neurophysiology lab at Northeastern, and did some really awesome work there, and in some synthetic biology work and some 3D printing, especially in the neuro space, but really wanted to see some of the research that I was doing translate into helping patients. A lot of my background was in medical devices and med tech originally. And so got hooked up with a great research organization where we developed a portfolio. My co-founder and I developed a portfolio of neuro instruments, whether those be what we'll be talking about today. We had some treatment devices, both for traumatic brain injury and stroke, really any kind of neuro degenerative, but also neuro insult, conditions. And that company that I was with at the time, in their business model, their commercialization branch was really to license product out. And so my co-founder and I, who were working together pretty closely at the time, every time we would go out to talk to neurosurgeons and neurointensivists and emergency department physicians, it didn't matter what we wanted to talk about. It was more, they wanted to talk about non-invasive intracranial pressure. And so, we couldn't say no, we couldn't put it down, and we pitched to spin it out. And earlier this year, we accomplished that. So since then, we've been doing a lot of great work in the space. We're preparing a manuscript right now, which I'll talk about a little bit, for some of our first injured patient populations. And, we're hopefully on the path towards a non-invasive means of detecting intracranial hypertension. So that's a little bit about my background. I'm the CEO and co-founder alongside my COO and co-founder, who I think most of the Bobby Jones folks know. Chris, he's at his daughter's first field hockey playoff game. I can't imagine how cold it is out in New Hampshire right now, but I'm happy to be talking to you guys here in the warmth. So, we'll just go through. I just giving an overview today, like we talked about. Products not on the market yet, but we can talk about some of the history we have here, what we're trying to do, why we're a little different, where we're going first, and where we're going after that. So, we have a tagline at CranioSense where we say that we're bringing intracranial hypertension into the light, which is a little bit of a play on our device since it's optical, but also because intracranial hypertension is scary, but is not necessarily something that is a household name in terms of a pathological state that we can detect, but then also treat. And the way that we're impacting that workflow is by simplifying the diagnostic process really across the clinical spectrum and regardless of the clinical setting. So that's kind of our mission here at CranioSense. I always put this slide at the beginning. I am the co-founder and CEO. I definitely, own a portion of the company, but we're very passionate about this, and we're as honest as we possibly can be with where we see the technology, how it's being evaluated, and where we could see it fitting into the clinical workflow and the patient experience. So I'll kind of walk through some of this stuff. I took a lot of this from our fundraising pitch deck. However, we won't be pitching today. So anything you might see in here that says, help us out, come on board, take that with a grain of salt. I'm just trying to talk about what we're doing at CranioSense. So what's the problem? Well, intracranial hypertension, which is too much pressure on the brain, is really tricky to diagnose, right? It's very critical that we diagnose it, right? Say in the same way that it's really critical that we diagnose elevated blood pressure. But for us right now, it's really hard to tell if that pressure is elevated beyond this magic number of 20 or 22 millimeters of mercury, where we deem it clinically necessary to treat. The symptoms are fairly common. It's headache, blurred vision, altered mental status. Those really are, those probably come along with, 50% of our major diagnoses in the hospitals today. But unfortunately, about most hospitals in the US lack the specialties to actually diagnose intracranial hypertension, which comes along with actually physically measuring it by putting a hole in your head or a hole in your spine. Really, we have tools to look at how the anatomy is changing and things like that through CT scanners and some presentation scales like Glasgow Coma Scale. But really, the way that we diagnose today is still highly invasive. And so this means that we rely on unreliable tools to do it non-invasively, really at most hospitals in the US. So the hospitals that have neuro either on site or on call are level 1 and level 2 trauma centers. And those make up a very small portion of our clinical setting today. And so breaking down kind of what's available today, I just talked about it, but each one of these things, symptomology, severity scales, neuroimaging, they really come with these high false positive and false negative rates. And the reasoning is not the doctor doing it. It's more that these tools are simply designed to look at some of the outcomes of having pressure, right? So pressure leads to altered mental status, change in motor skills, that sort of thing. And as does a number of other conditions. But then also our neuroimaging today is essentially just an anatomical map of what's happened. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there is pressure on board. So the way my brain, may be shifted after an insult, or the way it might be compressed, and the way that Caitlin's may show the same on imaging, and I may have pressure and she may not. And it's really, really difficult to figure out which one does and which one doesn't. And, we talked about bringing into light, and while intracranial hypertension seems to be hidden and unseen, very different from the way that the swelling in our knee is very visible, and we can tell that there's something wrong. Intracranial hypertension is hidden. The patients that it affects really are far from it. About 9 million patients come into the emergency rooms each year in the US at risk of intracranial hypertension. This runs the gamut from traumatic brain injury to stroke, to hydrocephalus, to chronic issues. And if left untreated for just 2 hours, we'll have lasting neurological deficits the majority of the time. Unfortunately, the people that are most commonly having these symptoms and these elevated pressure states are also the people that happen to be really hard to diagnose with our current tools. So children under 4, adults over 65, and sick patients who are actually contraindicated for having those invasive sensors. So this just compounds the problem. And when we look at really the scope of everything, we pan out, it's not just an emergency room issue. This impacts everybody from primary care to the emergency room to inpatient to at-home chronic disease states. And so this is a really big issue, right? Something that really one tool won't and can't tackle itself. But maybe one company over a period of time can. And so this really boils down to where can we help first, right? This is a big journey for us, is to try to understand, where can we help today without changing too much, without, completely trying to rework the clinical workflows, without upsetting kind of clinical standards of care today, but while having still a huge impact. And this is why we're focusing initially on traumatic brain injury. Today's workflows are pretty standardized. The intracranial hypertension guidelines are in place, and they know exactly what to do. Physicians know exactly what to do in terms if the pressure is high, right? We explored things like hydrocephalus, Chiari, cardiac arrest, stroke, and while we can definitely help all those populations long term, this is a good place to start to get clinical traction, help as many people as we possibly can day one, and then be trusted enough to be sent to home populations, primary care offices, and inpatient. It also has some pretty scary stats, especially when we focus down to where we're focusing first, which is primarily in integrated delivery network, rural and suburban America, where they don't have neuron staff, which means that while half of about the 5 million patients that come to the emergency room with symptoms each year arrive at these places, there's no neurological support on staff for them, right? And so this mismatch between patient complexity and caregiver availability has led to some harsher misdiagnosis rates, as well as about 3 times the death rate compared to their urban counterparts, right? We can help to change that. And it's really a problem with the fact that we need tools that can respond and be used by anyone, anywhere, anytime, in the same way that traumatic brain injury affects our patients. Today's tools, without getting really deep into the alternatives today, they're either fast, cheap, but inaccurate, or then they're accurate, but then they're very invasive. They require specialized tools and personnel. And really, we just relegate those to monitoring after the fact, right? So we put those in and we make sure that things are getting better or not getting worse in the least. And so what we're trying to come out with is something that can be used in these settings at a high accuracy rate, but also a manageable cost for everybody involved. And so that's the where can we help, right? And so this is kind of how can we help, right? And that's where we started, right? That's really where we tried to understand what kind of solution can we bring to bear on the market that would really have the highest impact. And our device uses near-infrared optics to look into the brain and look at the blood vessels and then compare them to blood vessels outside of the brain. And essentially what that does is makes each patient their own pressure reference point. And it's that differential between what is an unknown state and what is a known state in your finger or your ear or your forehead. That differential is what can be predictable. What a lot of these alternatives have kind of helped us realize, right, is that when we just look at anatomy alone, it's not enough, especially in the nervous system, right, to try to make the entire population look like one line, right? We're all different. Everything that is affecting our nervous system is different. In acute settings, the medication on board, the physiological state of that patient is different, right? And that's why we're getting a lot of these high false positive rates. What we did was took a step back and say, well, what can we use to look at the differential between the nervous system and what it normally does? And normally people would call that a baseline, right? We'll just go get everybody's baseline and say, okay, here's them at their healthy state. And then when they get sick, we'll surely be able to tell the difference. Our solution counteracts that. Our solution says, here is your blood vessels. Here are your blood vessels under a normal pressure outside of your brain, atmospheric pressure. And here are your blood vessels under an unknown pressure. So that allows us to be faster. We can be applied in minutes by nurses, regardless of when we get on. We'll be able to tell you what the intracranial pressure state is. We're better. We can reach 20 times the number of patients as those invasive sensors, but at a higher accuracy than all of the non-invasive sensors available today. And then we're cheaper at about 1/10 the cost of those invasive sensors. And the way that we do this, without getting too deep in the weeds, but I think it's important to know, is we're using something that has been explored for decades for non-invasive blood pressure monitoring. cuffless blood pressure monitoring. And over those decades, they've been able to show that this measurement, what people have coined pulse transit time, is able to detect the blood pressure non-invasively without using kind of that traditional pressure cuff. So they just use near infrared light to look at your blood vessels. And the problem was that it always had to be baseline too, right? Until we took a step back and said, we are looking at two very different parts of your body with two different pressure states. That allows us to not have to zero because your finger is your zero. And that's the general thesis behind this, is that everything that we're worried about with blood pressure, with medications on board, skin tone, vasodilation, can be zeroed out by looking at these 2 points. But the question always is, will this work? We've been able to demonstrate that in the healthy population, it does work, right? So those two things correlate to each other. And we did this by flipping people essentially upside down and understanding the hydrostatic state of those patients. So we can estimate the ICP, the intracranial pressure, and we have our readings and we just compare those to each other. And so we took a bunch of different readings to make sure that the cardiologics, the cardiological system was not impacting our readings. So blood pressure, heart rate, it's pulse volume, those sorts of things. And we were able to demonstrate that pulse transit time does correlate to intracranial pressure in these patients. And so we published that as kind of a feasibility demonstration, like, hey, this is worth pursuing, back in the end of 2020. And so that was kind of the first mark of, hey, we have something here. So then we went into those really sick patients, those traumatic brain injury patients, and we wanted to do the same thing, but with a true pressure measure. And so those patients that already had one of those invasive sensors in, we put our system on and we looked at our readings versus their readings. And you could see some of this here. We've recruited about 33 patients. We've processed about 12 of those patients. It says 52 data points. That's 52 reading sessions. That rounds out to about 3,000 different data points that we were able to compare to each other. We presented this at Neurocritical Care Society in 2022 and 23. One was myself in a poster. The other this year was one of our nurse collaborators talking about non-invasive pressure monitoring on a panel with a couple other different technologies. She presented some of this data initially. So this is our ability to differentiate those patients that have had a traumatic brain injury that have high pressure from those that have normal pressure, right? And so when I talk about that 93% accuracy, it's really our ability to differentiate, hey, this person needs clinical help and this person is clinically normal. And this, like I said, is far beyond anything else in those 60% accuracy, 40% false positive rate alternatives. And so this is really our jump off point from where do we go next. We have this device, we want to go to the emergency rooms, right, and be able to support clinical care and optimize that workflow. But ultimately, we have aspirations to go past that, right? So our minimally viable product that we're bringing to market in 2026 will do just that. It'll really help that ED, emergency department triage, and some outpatient diagnosis. But then quickly after that, we're going to be coming out with a monitoring device that will allow us to then monitor those patients to make sure that they're not getting worse, but then also monitor their treatment to make sure that they're getting better as well in inpatient settings. And then eventually our Gen 2 or device in 2029 will really be a true intracranial pressure number alternative to common parenchymal bolts. So those are the invasive sensors that don't drain. So they don't double as treatment. It's purely a pressure measurement system. It doesn't show it on here, but we are very patient-centric. Long term, we want to bring this to patients where they are, right? Especially those with chronic conditions, right? And I think the beauty of our technology is the fact that it can be used by really anybody that is relatively trained in putting on band-aids and clips, right? So long term, this is something that facilitates chronic monitoring in a way that the others can't even come close to, because they're huge, systems and complex in application and So that really sets us apart as well long term. We have this milestone in terms of growth. Like I said, the only real takeaway on this slide, there's usually much more for our investors, but is that we're going to be on market at the end of 2026. We have a few pilots earmarked already, and are looking for collaborators as well to expand that. Really, over our next 12 months, it's going to be building out the evidence around this device. So, like I said, we're going to be preparing our manuscript that I just talked about, the differentiation between high pressure and normal pressure at the end of this year. And then we're entering multiple other studies starting hopefully at the end of this year in December, but holidays. So probably starting in January and getting that out in the first 2 quarters of next year with another gold standard measurement. At least one other gold standard measurement. So that's very exciting. We have some technical work to do. This is our prototype that we just got out a few weeks ago. It's a battery powered system now. And it is just, we make incremental steps each time, closer and closer to that picture, that theoretical picture that I showed originally. Like I said, we do have a clinical roadmap to achieve this. We're looking for a few additional sites for our de novo study, but there's no shortage of people that know that this is an issue and want to help, right? So, and we love help. So if anybody is on board with helping, we love collaborating. But ultimately, I already kind of talked about the future for us. We talked about multiple indications, at-home settings, chronic conditions. We're starting in head trauma, but there's sepsis, hydrocephalus, liver failure. Patients that can't get other monitoring systems and have to try to decipher, is this headache intracranial pressure, or is this headache a headache? Allergies, right? Which is a terrible place to leave our patients, but really we don't have alternatives today. So we're trying to be that alternative. We want to be everywhere. We have a tool that can do it. And just appreciate Bobby Jones for allowing us to be here to share a little bit about what we're doing. So thank you guys. This is my LinkedIn QR code. Totally reach out. Happy to take questions right now, but hopefully this kind of spurs some collaboration and some questions and some excitement. So thank you guys.
That was great. Thank you so much, Ryan. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat. I know we have a couple of questions that I had from before, but I wanted to start with like a very, very basic one. How is the device used? So you showed a picture of it just before, but how is it worn? How much does the patient need to do versus what nurses and doctors need to do? How does it function?
Yeah. So, you know what? Here, we're going to go like this and blow up the picture. So that's a great question. First of all, the human factors and patient perspective is huge for us. We actually have already taken a human factors kind of pivot in terms of how the sensors sit and how easy they are to use. So originally we were targeting one specific artery that's coming from your head, and while that worked, it was a total human factors usability nightmare. We designed an app literally to try to find that artery. So from there, instead it's really forehead agnostic. So if you have like a nice big forehead like me, great, you could slap it anywhere. And in the initial market, right, it's usable to the point where we think we can get to like nursing, physician assistant, and maybe even lower trained care echelon. Really, there's going to be an adhesive that sticks on the forehead, similar to other sensors on the market. It's a finger clip that looks like a pulse oximeter, and an ear clip that looks right now like a clothes hanger, but we will make it look cooler. But our nurses have really helped us to this date to refine that. So initial product really looks like kind of like a blood pressure cuff measurement when you go to the emergency room. That's how we're kind of thinking of it. But then long term, easier and easier, especially once we get into a chronic setting. Ease of use is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And shout out to the nurses that are helping you
Oh
troubleshoot.
yeah, they're
Um,
amazing.
um, so a question that came in ahead of time is that someone had had an ICP monitor done, and three different doctors gave three different diagnoses, so they never went back. So
Mm.
is something like this a bit more accurate and less invasive? How do you differentiate what those diagnoses actually are that the doctors end up delivering?
Yeah. So one of the fun, like one of the rewarding and also devastating parts of my job is hearing patient stories. Um, it's great because we know we're on the right path. It's horrible because somebody had to live through kind of our current tool set. Um, and it really gets down to, like, especially with our chronic patients, it's they go to 8 different doctors, and then and they're all wrong, and then the last one tells them, I know what it is, let me just shove this needle in your spine, right? And they're like, well, 8 other were wrong. What do are you how do I know that you're going to be right? And so they have to make this decision on, should I wait to kind of go a little blind to confirm that, or should I just get this done, and maybe they're wrong still. um, and so with our device, it's so easy that it can be applied. We're thinking of it kind of like in that setting, kind of like a Holter monitor, where your ICP fluctuates daily, right? And you need to be able to catch when it's high and when it's normal, right? And not just rely on the fact that, hopefully at that outpatient point, when you go in to get this procedure done, it's high, right? So this kind of completely changes the way that we're trying to catch patients that have elevated pressure. And there's complications not knowing precisely what they had. But there's all sorts of issues with failures in terms of invasive sensors, infection, wrong readings, wrong implementation, shunt failure, that sort of stuff, that we kind of just take that out. We could be a redundant sensor. We could be a sensor on initially. So there's a lot of different avenues, but way less invasive, way cheaper, way quicker. So much more flexible to work
Yeah.
on those. So
One of a question just came in, and there are a couple associated, but I'm going to do this first because I think it's flowing better. Someone had mentioned that they were just sick the entire time they had the ICP monitor in, and it's this really invasive tool. So, um, is is there a known in the TBI patients that I guess you were working with? How did they respond? Obviously, they're not well if they have high pressure. So, how did
Mhm.
they respond to the device itself? Was it helpful, or were they able to use it, and if they were too ill?
So a lot of our really, really sick patients are intubated and sedated, right? And so, uh, like, and they're instrumented, like, up the wazoo, right? Like, our system is like the least of their concern. The interesting part is that from a traumatic brain injury perspective, when you start to come to, like, your fingers, your hands are the first thing that start to respond. And so the finger sensor, all finger sensors, pulse ox, whatever you have on, ends up getting kind of ripped off. And then but they have means of, kind of like, we started putting gloves on folks, and just using regular kind of clinical tools to make sure that didn't happen. But yeah, so but from an adverse event, kind of perspective, there's no heat, there's no, like, they barely know that it's there, especially compared to their other sets of equipment. There's no vibration, there's nothing. So I think the biggest concern is there's cables, and cable fatigue in the hospitals is huge, but is
Yeah.
also huge. So, we're balancing all of that.
Dorothy, we can hear you.
Yeah.
um, and then where's my next question here? Something that had come in ahead of time was that I'm just going to do this really bad. um,
they want to talk to you?
Uh, Someone had had a bolt monitor done. They were expecting high pressure, but it was just this crazy range where it went from negative numbers, -5, like over being upright, and then lying down flat. It could increase up to the 20s almost. So
Mhm.
I guess since you're kind of in that space, even from a scientific standpoint, how does pressure vary that much? Is it the
Yeah.
tool, or is it something with the pressure itself? And then uh, how does this tool work to maybe try to figure out what is real versus what is just, an error
Yeah.
from measurement?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the tools themselves have variability and kind of quirks about them in general, like EBDs. Like it depends on, you know, where you have the stopcock and certain things and where the tubing flows. And so, it could be sensors and, like any sensor, you're gonna sometimes have placement issues. I think the luxury of ours is if you have a placement issue, you peel it off and you put it uh, on a different part of your forehead, or it didn't have the right adhesion, so you just peel it off and put it back on, which becomes a little bit more difficult with invasive sensors. That said, though, without knowing kind of what happened to that patient, postural changes. The reason probably they had to do that is it has a huge swing in ICP. So you typically, when you're more vertical, you'll have a lower intracranial pressure. When you're laying down, you'll have a higher, which is also why we elevate our intracranial or our traumatic brain injury patients. Is it induces a lower pressure state, right? It's one of the treatments that we have available to us. Um, so, um, so yeah, I think the where we can help with that is if we think it's part of the sensor itself, we can always just pick the sensor off. We can throw that sensor away and use a brand new one right after that and see, which we have a little bit more luxury with non-invasively than we do invasively right now. So
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
yeah.
And just because this is top of mind for me right now, I'm actually wearing a Holter monitor. So,
Oh,
but as
oh,
far as the adhesives go, I know this is a thing for me.
mm,
With sensitive skin, do you have, I know a lot of our patients have things with like mast cell activation and different, sensitivities. So I
yeah.
wonder if that's something that you can work into the, obviously generations down, but is that
Yeah.
something you're considering?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, biocompatibility and skin irritation are always, it's one of the things that can go wrong with a topical sensor. And so there's been a lot of good work in adhesives in over the past, 10, 15 years. And so, we will incorporate those in. There's always trade-offs with anything, like, um, somebody may have a reaction to one type, and then you could potentially swap it out for another and they won't have that, for whatever reason. So I think we'll probably find the one that works for the vast majority of folks, and then try to make sure that we have others that, especially if it's a indication specific issue, then we'll have other sensor or at least other adhesion types to go along with it. Actually, one of the things that we have been doing, you saw it on my co-founder's forehead. That was my co-founder in the picture, by the way.
Oh, no.
He We have a headband option as well, right? So if kind of the adhesive is causing issues, then we could always do more of a mechanical kind of press against the forehead, which works as well. So we have some options, but it's a great point.
Yeah, that's great. Um, there's a question here, really just about the slog that it is, the journey of getting a diagnosis in the first place. So,
Yeah.
and about getting things approved and all that. So I do wonder, and this might be way, way off because you're not even to market yet, but what do you anticipate would be sort of the payer and insurance situation on getting a device like this or having it in the emergency room stuff? And I know that's such a loaded question, so I'm sorry to
Oh
be.
no, it's a great question. It's something that I think every early company should be thinking about is who's going to pay for this, right? And it is a slog, it's a journey, right? I think the luxury that we have is that it's such a big need, and such a saver, honestly, kind of across the board. We talked about, the journey of getting a diagnosis, right? Every time you go to a doctor, your insurance company is paying for it. They want you to go to one doctor, right? Your insurance company has incentive to make certain technologies available, right? And pay for them because it saves them money. And for you guys, I would always like to think that this is kind of the reason. It is, 7 less doctors that you have to go to. But we have some strategies that we're working through in terms of the emergency room first. Ultimately, long term, the goal is really to get our own code, and then it would be reimbursed across the board. So it would be reimbursed at outpatient clinics like headache clinics and things like neuro clinics. It'd be reimbursed at primary care. So that's the goal. It takes some time and some evidence building, but we have some other intermittent steps that we can go through to try and get it paid for, not by our patients. We are applying for a breakthrough designation, so the FDA has and CMS has tried to support young technologies that way as well, to try to get earlier reimbursement. So yeah, we're top of mind for sure. Don't want patients paying for any of this. Just want to help patients. So
Yeah, and I will chime in quickly that if you ever wanted to get involved in advocacy with us, that's kind of the kind of stuff that we try to push for.
yes, 100%. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I will push. Yes, I will push for for early reimbursement every day of the week.
Absolutely. Um, and then, so I had a question just about differentiating the hypertensive TBI patients versus their own normal.
Mhm.
Um, how did you, how were you able to do that with like any kind of success? Like, I just find like that so fascinating.
Yeah. It's really, it's really the difference in that pressure differential theory that we had. I think that's what ends up allowing us to say, this is not normal, right? Like, usually you would look for like, optic sheath diameter looks at the diameter of a specific nerve using an ultrasound probe, which is user specific. It's different from patient to patient, and we haven't figured out like what normal is in that state. I think for us is, outside of that is like, we have the luxury of having like, if somebody had one eye that was swollen and one healthy eye, and you could be like, oh, that looks very different. We have that luxury by using the technique that we're using, right? So the way we went about it though was really with these invasive sensors is you have the goal of these invasive sensors for the EVDs is to drain off a lot of the fluid so that you have a lower pressure. So we were actually able to get a lot of high pressures where we're like, okay, this is what we're seeing in our sensor. And then we get a lot of low pressures or normal pressures. And that's how we're able to say, oh, this, like that graph was pretty stark in terms of like, these patients are like separated in our sensor, which is really exciting. And so we're really excited to publish that and get that out there. But it was a fun study to run. I think the tough part is we can't help patients yet. We're still gathering that data. I think it's going to be wonderful when we could say we helped our first patient. So
um, another question, in those healthy patients that you started with when you were studying them with the tilt table,
yep.
did any of them experience just dizziness just from being tilted, because that just does happen? And then were you
Yeah.
able to predict any of those with the device?
Sensor. So the way, see, this is the tricky part. It's that study is great for demonstrating feasibility, but then it opened up a bunch of questions for us as well. So we instrumented these patients pretty robustly, and then we and really the way you get the hydrostatic pressure, which is can be used for intracranial pressure, is like their weight, their height, the angle that you dip them at, right? But that's still just without an invasive sensor telling you exactly what the intracranial pressure was, it becomes a little difficult, right? So you actually saw that it wasn't this straight line, and at the end it comes back down. Our bodies are really good at saying, whoa, that's too high, like let's try to fix this. When we're sick or when we have too much going on, and our bodies stop being able to compensate for that, and that's when we get really high pressures. So there was a little bit of like dizziness and stuff like that you could predict with higher intracranial pressures. My co-founder is also crazy. He, like, when we got our prototype, he's like, yeah, I laid on my bed and I flipped upside down and it said my pressure went up, and he's like, it's working. And I was like, that's what it's made to do, man. So yeah, it was it was kind of interesting because we also were gathering data too. It wasn't displaying too much to us, so we couldn't say, "Oh, that went up," right? So we saw all of that after the fact. So
Yeah, okay, that's awesome.
yeah.
Um, Another question, how long does the same patient have to use the sensor to kind of get their own baseline? Is there a certain amount of time until you're like, got it, that's normal for me versus someone else?
Yeah, we haven't tested it in like that kind of chronic wear setting. I should probably just like wear it for like days and see what happens. Um, it's kind of it would probably be the same time span that you would want to do if you were trying to track your blood pressure or your heart rate, right? So from a chronic perspective, because it our bodies naturally flush the CSF out, and so we get dips, like I said, when we're standing up, but at night, it's kind of, it goes back down, which that or it goes back up, which is natural and normal. But yeah, that baseline perspective of like, hey, what did I do today versus yesterday? What did I eat today? How much did I drink today? Right. All that stuff would probably take a little bit of time. Or the sensor itself takes about a minute right now to get a reading. Right. So that's not really the issue. It's more like how variable are our bodies, which will be fun to explore eventually.
And I mean that I know that's a loaded question too, because like you kind of just said, everything affects that. So everything from
Yeah.
like water you drank today. So
Yeah. But that's okay. I mean, it'll help patients too to understand what's triggering them to go out of balance. If it's truly like a once in a while thing, and help people manage just kind of a little bit more organically, say. Kind of like everything else, right? Like, oh, I snore when I have 3 beers before I go to bed, right? Like, I should, if I don't want to snore tonight, I should avoid that sort of thing. So yeah, same thing, right? So that'll be fun long term as well.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so I know you put 2026 as that first rung. So
Mhm.
are you anticipating that this tool is going to be used in the ED? And are you anticipating it strictly in the TBI patients, or when does that kind of expansion occur on that timeline? And I took the thing away from you. I'm sorry, but
No, it's totally fine. Um, so that's also a little bit of a loaded question. So it's dependent on a few things. It's dependent on the FDA. We are going for like a broader indication. And so if we get that, it could be used by anybody in the emergency department when they suspect intracranial hypertension. So that could be idiopathic intracranial hypertension, hydrocephalus, stroke, traumatic brain, anybody that presents to the emergency department. We may have to start narrower than we want and then expand out. So that would change a little bit. So we'd focus on traumatic brain injury and then just do additional studies, which would take a little bit of time, not too much. The emergency department starting there too is better from a reimbursement perspective as well a little bit. So that allows to get some traction and then get it reimbursed so it can go to primary care Primary care and outpatient clinics tend to not use things that are, unless the patient is ready to pay. They don't use things that aren't reimbursed. So from a strategy perspective, we plan to expand there. And then, children, which is a whole other indication, but a much needed space. We had Boston Children's on our collaborator map and things like that. So we have grand expansion plans, but we got to start somewhere first. So
I know all these questions I'm asking are like several years down the line, but they're really, really important. And I just
definitely
appreciate you even taking this topic on.
Yeah. We want to, like, our goal is to help as many patients as we possibly can. I mean, we mentioned 9 million patients. That's in the emergency department, right? Like, we're not talking about migraine patients and chronic migraine patients. We're not talking about the 68, 69 million people that have a traumatic brain injury around the world. Like, that's just in the US, by the way, too, right? So the reach that we can have is huge, and we want to help all those patients, but the best way to do that is to try to get like a measured approach to this problem, and then just gain momentum as we go and expand as fast as we possibly can. So
that did just provoke a thought in me, though. As far as like accessibility, is everything in English, like, or are you
right now? Yeah, I mean, right now it's in English. I think the good thing about what we're doing, though, is we're talking about like I kind of correlate it to like a thermometer, right? Like 22F, or 22C, right? Like it kind of transcends, you know, uh, uh, different languages and ethnicities and backgrounds and things like that. So the hope is to eventually say, like, in the same way we have a thermometer that says, this is normal. If it gets to 100.5, take Tylenol. If it gets to 104, go to the hospital, right? Is to have a solution that can be that kind of a scale and response clinically. So, and universal in meaning.
That's great. I'm going to ask this question because I don't know if we talked about it very much, and I didn't mention it either. So sorry about that. But how did we connect? How did we get
How do
in
we
touch?
connect? Yeah. Cold outreach. So I mentioned that we like collaboration and we love people in the space and want to expand our reach as much as possible. And so I still remember, like, we're sitting in my office. It's all blurred. It's under construction. I built all these shelves, but like for the past, I don't know how many, too many months, it's been under construction. I found you guys. I was working in my son's nursery and I was like, oh my gosh, I got to reach out to them. And you guys responded like immediately and we got connected immediately. And I came down to see you guys and have a good time in Washington. And our mantra is really to find good people to work with, and we always love working with you guys. So I'm sure we'll be back for more in other events. So
absolutely, yeah. And just to add to that, the reason we got back so quickly is we just love when really exciting new things are being done that will actually help the patients that we serve. So we were like, this sounds great. Let's hear more about it. So yeah, it was really great that you reached out. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. I was surprised we didn't get connected before that, but I was like, well, so, because honestly, I reached out to another couple of places, one of which I just learned was actually, it's not a thing anymore. But I was like, oh man, this is a great thing for, again, it was patient centric, a smaller disease state. It was for idiopathic intracranial hypertension. I was like, that's awesome, right? But didn't know about that either. So I love these foundations. Love what you guys are doing because it's it's not a traumatic brain injury. Everybody knows what concussion is. So they need help too, but they don't have the NFL standing. You guys don't have the NFL standing up for you to be like, hey, Chiari, what's up? So
Right.
glad you guys.
Yeah. And then to round everything out, and maybe I might have like one more question, but
Yeah.
um, what can patients and us, patient advocacy organizations, do to help a product like this make it to market? What can we do today? What can we do in 2026 or 2029 or afterward to help make this a viable tool that patients can use either in the emergency room when they are having an urgent issue, or at
Mhm.
their doctor's office, primary care, or even at home? Like, what can we do along that path to help you make
Yeah. So this may be surprising, but a lot of important decisions are driven by people just continuing to talk and ask about things. Whether that's patients asking doctors, or whether that's doctors asking insurance companies, or whether that's patients asking insurance companies. Um, when they see a need for it and they can link that to better care, better patient outcomes, like a happier patient at the end of the day ends up costing insurance companies less. There's a big alignment with that, right? So, um, and there's a number of different reasons. That usually means that they're getting better, right? But that also means that there's less other costs that come along with having not getting the clinical care you need. Also, has triggers into all sorts of other quality of life issues that end up costing them that. So it's really standing up and saying there's a want for this, there's a true need for this. That helps from uh, the insurance companies, that helps get it into hospitals, that helps us raise money, right? I know that's kind of a weird thing to say, like talk about, but when we can't get to market till 2026, that means we're not bringing in product revenue until 2026. So we're giving away portions of our company in order to raise money to get there, right? That the established need of like, when is this coming? When is this coming? Tells investors that it's wanted and needed, right? Which is huge for us. That traction is huge. So yeah, it's talking about it. It's working with us, or other, this kind of just goes along for anybody you guys want to support, right? Um, those understanding your journeys, like, helps us to understand how our system needs to fit within those journeys to make your lives better, right? So reaching out to people, sharing your story. If they don't want to hear your story, they may not be worth supporting, right? Like, go to somebody that cares about the patient, the doctor, that journey, everything. If a patient reaches out to me, I always email back. And unfortunately, a lot of the time it's, when can I use this? And I have to say, you can use as soon as we have it ready, you can use it. But we always respond to patients. So
even
yeah,
if,
that's a lot. But
well, but just in summary, it's like your testimonial, like
testimonial is huge.
why
Yeah.
why this tool would probably be helpful for you and why you could have used it however long ago.
Yeah.
That to me sounds like what you kind of are getting
Yeah,
at.
it is. No, it is. That becomes huge.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and then I guess to close out, because we're coming up on 8:30, how can people get in touch with you? I'm gonna make you the host again because I just remembered
Yeah.
that you had a
Yeah.
slide. And then if anyone had any questions, would they be able to reach out, and how?
Yes. Yeah, you can definitely reach out to me. That's my co-founder. Um, so this is my general contact information. You can text me. There's other also more convenient ways to reach out, but this QR code is my LinkedIn. Our website is right here. There's some contact stuff on there. If you ever like, hey, I can't remember his name. You could always go to CranioSense, contact us. It goes right to my co-founder and I, so you're not going to get shuffled into some weird drawer of doom. And then yeah, our LinkedIn is here. We always post what's going on, where we are. So yeah, definitely encourage everybody to reach out if you have any questions or just want to talk or anything.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing this and for talking about this really exciting tool. A couple of people have already said that this is really exciting, and they're thanking you for doing this today.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah.
Anytime. I mean, we do it. That's why my co-founder and I are here. I'm a scientist in medical kind of background, medical device background. And that's why we got into this. It was the patients, so we're all patients, right? Like I would hope somebody else is going to fix whatever I get at the end of the day. Right. So we need people out there, working on this stuff. So
awesome. Well, thank you for working on this particular area.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining us too. This was great.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for having me. Don't be, I know everybody always says reach out if you like, don't be shy. Like, please. I know a lot of people in the space too. So if you see anybody I'm connected to and you're like, hey, can you get an intro? Like, happy to do that as well. So just, it's a community. Yeah, that's what you guys are doing. You're I think you call it the family, but community. So yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Thank you for doing this, and thanks everyone for joining us today, and hopefully we can do this again in 2026 when we hear all about the successes.
Let's do it. Yeah, we'll do it sooner than that. Like right before we come to market or something like that. But yeah.
Awesome. Thanks everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.